kudos go to the AV guys for putting that together. You know, I think it really shows kind of on the theme from Zach's keynote from yesterday on the creativity of open source. It's not just the code, it's in music and it's in lots of things. So, so thank you very much. With saying that, we do have one great keynote this morning. Jim Laskey from the Nashorn Project, the project lead from the Nashorn Project, is going to come and talk about where they're going with it. And I think where you see kind of the industry going, JavaScript is so important. And that's why I wanted to kind of have Jim come and talk about the project and what's the future, how Java developers and JavaScript is going to be coming together. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Jim Laskey.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Good morning, everybody. I'm here to talk about Nashorn. The Nashorn group is something that started about 3 years ago to look into the possibility of implementing a JavaScript on the JVM. And it started out with one person, being me, and then gradually grew up to a fairly small team. It still remains small, but we've done quite a bit over the last few years. When I do an Oracle presentation or talk about Oracle, I have to go through the legal. That keeps the lawyers happy. So my clicker's gone again. And my keyboard's gone again. Excuse me, I'm going to have to reboot. This is not, this happened earlier, and I'm surprised that it's happening. Let's hang on. Of course, you'll edit this out, right? Okay. Okay, yeah. There we go. Okay. So, the team is actually focusing on multi-language things altogether. So we're not just about JavaScript, the Nashorn project, but we're also about making it easier for languages on the JVM to talk to each other, and this is the Dynalink project. And then also a project that started out as an example of how Nashorn could be used was converting Node.js over to work on Nashorn, and that's our Node.jar project. And I'll talk a little bit about those as we move along. So what's the scripting thing about? Well, the idea is that not everything needs to be written in Java, and sometimes it's simpler to write it in a different language, and a lot of you have adopted languages like Groovy and Scala and whatnot, so Java isn't the end-all to everything. And then sometimes you want to do things, quick and dirty, or prototype things, or you're importing over code from another platform, another situation, and you need to work in a language other than Java. So we need to consider having multiple languages on, and scripting languages are obviously very important. We like the dynamic style. You don't have to worry about strong typing. You want to be able to basically just get things done. There's a lot of content developers out there that use JavaScript. They're familiar with JavaScript through web pages. With HTML5 adoption, there's more and more of that out there, and we'd like to get those content developers working on the JVM using a language that they're familiar with. As I mentioned, rapid prototyping. And another thing that you should consider in an enterprise situation, you can use scripting for post-build configuration options, so that you could actually write code in configuration that can be modified in the field by field engineers. So there's all kinds of possibilities if you have scripting available to you. The way I look at scripting is that Java and COBOL and all those languages that have been around for a while, they're very formal in the way that they work. They have particular layouts that you need to follow to fit into the formality. And whereas scripting language is more about just sort of getting it done. And just getting right to the point. And so there's a less formality about it. That doesn't mean that you can't use, let's say, JavaScript to do full development or full application development. It just means that it's a little bit easier to get there sometimes. The JavaScript project, the JavaFX project a few years ago. I had a sub-project called JavaFX script. And it was a new programming language used to develop FX applications in. And this is when I started at Sun, before Oracle acquired it. We were working on this compiler for this language, but during the process, I was sort of coming to the conclusion that the adoption of this new language is going to be very slow. It's hard to get people to accept new languages, and that we really should be taking another language and adding features to it to adapt the FX components of it. Now, we were thinking about JavaScript right away, almost immediately, but then we were realizing that Rhino was getting a little bit older, and we have all these security issues around Rhino, and if we wanted to use any of the newer technology, it was not easily modified to accept these new things, like the invoke dynamic instructions. There were other languages to look at, but it seemed that JavaScript was the way to go. So this is sort of the slide that we used to present to management. Why should we bring JavaScript into the JVM? It advances the technology on the JVM, allows other languages to come in. It's not so Java-centric. It'll attract new developers who like other languages other than Java. JavaScript was a very similar language to Java, so the syntaxes are very similar, but less formal. And of course, I mentioned earlier about HTML5, popularity of HTML5. And the applications that you would write are adaptable to lots of different levels or scalability levels. So obviously, we were talking about FX and running as a client. We've been able to run Nashorn on mobile devices, and in particular, we've had them on Raspberry Pis and Beagle boards. It runs just fine, works well. And then on the server side, to be able to do things like JSP, we have an avatar project that's all JavaScript-based. So there's lots of possibilities at all levels. And there's a lot of people out there that are using Rhino, and I realized the other day that I had forgotten some of the places where people had been using Rhino. Somebody reported a bug in Ant, and that sort of surprised me. It's like, well, how does Ant and JavaScript tie in together? And I forgot there's a script tag in Ant, right? And people are actually doing some of their build scripts in JavaScript. I was trying to find some statistics about how many people are out there are actually using JavaScript, and it's really hard to work out. They say that there's about 9 million people using Java. Where do they come up with these numbers? I have no idea. But so I took some real data, and this is usage on GitHub and Stack Overflow, which languages that are fairly popular. And it seems that the JavaScript is right there in the top 4. So it just reinforces that this is the right way to go. So what is Nashorn? Nashorn is an OpenJDK project. It's sitting in OpenJDK. Everybody has access to the sources. They can monkey around with it and do whatever they want with it. It passes the standard ECMAScript testing, the 262. It's been doing that for well over a year. It's rock solid that way. And we're currently tracking the ES51 standard, which is what most people are using today. And that's what we will be shipping with JDK 8. We're also tracking ES6, which is the next, what was once called Harmony, but has evolved into a bunch of other things, which will have additional syntaxes for things like stronger typing and so on. So that's to probably follow up in maybe a year or so after the JDK 8 releases. Nashorn is pronounced Nashorn, and this is the German word for rhinoceros, and this is the evolution from Rhino to Nashorn. So we're paying respect to the previous version of implementation. But Nashorn is written from scratch and is 100% Java. And actually, when it passed the code over to be put into the OpenJDK, they were saying, well, how many binaries and libraries are included with it? And I said, nothing. It's all 100% Java. So this is the old world, and this rather demure-looking rhinoceros that's probably a species that's long been extinct. And this is the logo I came up with for Nashorn. It's a little bit proactive looking. I call it the raging red rhino. Yes, and it's a lot faster than Rhino. Okay, so the execution model for Nashorn is basically we take a script, We go through a compile process. We go create ASTs, optimize the ASTs, generate bytecode. We load and execute. So there's no interpreter involved here. We rely on the hotspot engine to actually run the code. So everything goes directly to bytecode. We also have the ability to be able to compile on demand. So it's very simply what happens is if you load a whole big script, we don't compile everything that's in there. We just compile things as they're needed. In doing so, though, what happens is we can find out that we can get a lot more optimization, because one of the difficulties in compiling JavaScript is that you have to sort of guess at types, because it's not strongly typed. If you compile on demand, then you can say, there's 2 integers being passed in. We know we can optimize this function. So there's this on-demand optimization going on. And finally, we're using Dynalink to handle our dynamic linking. And I'll try to explain that a little bit more as we go along. But effectively, whenever you have a call to something, you have to determine what to call at that particular point. And more often than not, that it is a JavaScript function that you're trying to call. But it could also be a Java function. Or it could actually be a Ruby function or some other language. So you need to be able to deal with that dynamically and adapt as we go along. How do I use Nashorn? As of last Friday, you can actually download it in part of the JDK. If you installed JDK 8b82, you'll get Nashorn. It's there. It's very, very straightforward. So download it, and what I do is typically just add it to my path so that I can just use it directly from my terminal or wherever I want to use it. You also have the ability to build it because it's in the OpenJDK. You can download the master sources and work with it, or we actually have our own forest, the Nashorn forest, where all the active changes to Nashorn will go there. So, and these days with the new build system, it's nothing to build a full JDK on your system. It only takes a few minutes, and whereas before it took quite a while. So that's all you have to do. It's just configure, basically get all the sources, configure, and make, and it's all there, and you can work with it. So I suggest getting involved in the open source community, or OpenJDK community. How do I use Nashorn? Well, there's a couple different ways. I'm just going to talk about 2 today, but the easiest way just to play around with it is a new command called JJS, which is basically JavaScript. And the reason we named it that was because JS was already being used. And we have a policy in the OpenJDK to any commands have to begin with the letter J. So it just became natural to call it JJS. So if you see JJS around, that's exactly what it means. It's Nashorn. So then you can just go in and play around with it the way you would with Rhino if you were working with Rhino directly. It's pretty straightforward. And I'll talk a little bit more detail about what sorts of things you can do. The other way of using Nashorn, this is probably more likely how you as a whole would use this, is to embed it in your Java code. And it's really easy to do. There's nothing complicated about it at all. We're using the JavaFX script API, which allows you to get a script engine. In this case, we're going to get Nashorn script engine and just feed it a script to execute through a simple evaluation. It's not hard at all. And of course, here I just have a very basic hello, print hello, but it can be a full-blown script. And you can do this repeatedly and add more and more script to the same session. And it'll build up the session. You can have multiple sessions. There's all these controls that you can do with it. You can do with it. I just want to digress a little bit here before I get into some demos. I want to do a few demos just to show you that it actually works and talk a little bit about why you might want to use it. Note that everything in Nashorn is dynamic. Almost everything is dynamic. When you get a property, a set of property, whether you do any get indexing or set indexing, make a call, have a new constructor, all of those things are dynamic. So that means that any behavior that's in your script can be adapted to do whatever you want it to do. So typically, if you're just running a straight script, you have a get property value, or get property value code. It would figure out that I need to get the property from a JavaScript object. But that could also be a Java object that we're getting it from. Okay, so all these things can be changed on the fly as we're executing. So here's just a simple example. We have var x receiver property. Now the trick here is that we don't know what the receiver is at compile time. And we really don't know what the receiver is going to look like until we actually get to this code. So what we need to be able to do is say, oh, this receiver is a JavaScript object. OK, so then I know how to get this property. OK, so I can go off and get the property and insert the code at this point to be able to get that property from the receiver. But the receiver could also be a Java object. It doesn't necessarily have to be a JavaScript object. So there's a different way of getting properties from a Java object. We think of properties as fields in Java. So we want to be able to get the field from the Java object. Or if it was a Ruby object, we want to be able to get that property from the Ruby object. And Ruby organizes its objects in a different way than JavaScript does. So we need to be able to adapt to that. So this is how the invoke dynamic is being used in Nashorn. We can adjust to fit the scenario. To do that, we use this library called Dynalink. This library was created by Attila Szegedi, originally, who's now a part of our team. And what it does is actually sets up the search engines for finding the solutions to these dynamic situations. Now, how complicated could it be? Well, it does get to be very complicated. In the basic JavaScript scenarios, getting a property is pretty easy. We just look it up in a map, and we say, oh, it's slot number 3 in the object, so we know we have to pull up slot number 3 from that object. So that's pretty straightforward. But if it's a Java object, getting that field or getting that property is a little bit more complicated. We have to search for that field and then set up a getField method handle to actually extract that value. So we have to go through that level. If you're making a call to a method in a Java object, the arguments may cause you to choose a different method each time. So for instance, if I was to call system out print line, and I feed it a string, well, there's one method for that. But if the argument I pass in the next time around is a double, well, there's a different overloaded version of println for that. So we need to be able to adapt to that. So this is the sorts of things that Dynalink takes care of. Everything in Dynalink is pluggable. So I can take in my basic linkers for handling all the Java scenarios, and then I can add linkers for the Nashorn scenarios. And if somebody wanted to be able to have Ruby connected to Nashorn so that they can share objects, then we can add a plugin that will allow Ruby to be able to talk to Nashorn or to Java. So Dynalink allows you to go through several alternatives, figure it out, determine things type specific, based on type specific. If you have to do conversions, so say if you have a car sequence and you need to convert it to a string in order to pass it as an argument to that method, then it'll handle all the conversions as well. OK, so what I want to do now is go through demos. I have some more slides after this. Go through a few demos just to show you sorts of things that you can do that maybe sort of spark some interest in why you might want to use Nashorn in your projects. OK. So the first example I have here is an FX program, JavaFX program, which is Hello World. And I just want to sort of go through this just to give you a sense of, well, what would you have to do if you were working in Java? Obviously, you have to Optionally, you have to give it a package, but then you have to import all the things that you're going to use in this example. You have to create a main. You have to wrap it in a class. You have declarations like overload. You can see in the actual code here, like in this case, you see we have a set title. And set title is a Java bean to set the title. We have the new button operation. Set text, again, is another bean that you want to set. Setting an action, we're adding a handler for the action of the button. Basically, we have to go through all these steps in order to do a basic bring up a dialog and with a button on it and want to go. So this is what you would do in Java. In Nashorn, this is what you do. It's basically very similar things, but it seems a lot simpler in the long run. So there's this load operation at the beginning. It basically just loads in all of the imports for JavaFX. So it just keeps it simple. You can do that dynamically. You don't have to have it embedded in your code. So that can be all done dynamically. Note in the previous slides that I was setting a bean set title. Well, because it's a bean, Dynalink knows that it can adapt a set property operation to this. So if you look at the actual code here, we don't have to call the function. We just set the title, and it seems a lot more natural. New button operation. Well, the button is a Java object. It's not a JavaScript object. So if I say new Java object, we have this adaptation that says, oh, it's a Java object. It's not a JavaScript object. So I know how to make new Java objects. So it gets adapts there. And the thing that's probably the most interesting thing here is that if you remember setting up the action on the button in the Java code, we had to go through this whole formality of creating the embedded subclass with the handler. Well, here, we just assign the function to the field. We don't have to go through all that formality. It's very straightforward. And it makes a lot of sense. It doesn't, you don't have to think about it too much. Here's just one more case here where we're using the beans. That in the other code, it was said GetChildren, which was a function to be able to do the add. Well, we don't have to say GetChildren. We just say the property children, and we figure out that we can adapt right there and then. So if I want to run this, just give me a second here. I'll switch the workspace, and I just want to make sure I have everything set up. Whoops. Set up everything right here. Okay, and we run it. So I have a shell that I've created called JVM SFX, specifically for FX. So it just simplifies the demonstrations here a little bit. And go off and run it. There's our hello world with the button in it. And since I said print hello world every time I push the button, you can see back in my window that it's doing the hello world. So very straightforward. Don't have to do much at all. Okay, so the next demonstration, or basically topic I want to talk about is a little bit about reusing libraries and also the use of oops, sorry, wrong one. This one here. The use of JJS as a shebang type application. So in this case, we can write our system scripts or our application scripts directly in JavaScript. We don't have to use Python or Perl or Bash. We can use JavaScript. So this is an extension that we've added to Nashorn. So if you have anything that you want to, like set up build scripts, whatever, you can do it using the shebang notation. So in order to support this, we obviously need to supported hash type comments. We have support for here strings. This is not something you would find normally in JavaScript. We have support for some extensions like exit, which allows you to exit the script. And of course, then there's some other options related to field access. You can have access to all of the arguments on your shebang script. And you also, I was going to say here, you also have the ability to have exec strings. So that's using the back quotes. Okay, so you can actually have any system command embedded in your script, and it would go off and evaluate. So in this case, what it does is try and find all occurrences of this file out in the local current directory, and trim it, get rid of trailing spaces, and split it into separate lines. So we basically get an array of all the places we can find it. There's another case of being able to use the exec string, but we have in this edit strings embedded in here. So the $where allows us to actually put an edit in the middle of the string. So these are all sorts of things that you would expect to be able to do in a Bash script or a Perl script. Okay. I'm just going to show one more example. This is the example I actually posted on the blog, Nashorn blog. One of the things I wanted to do, and this is sort of how I'm trying to figure out, where people would use Nashorn. One of the things I wanted to do was figure out how often Nashorn was being talked about on Twitter, and I wanted to sort of graph it to sort of see what happens. And typically, you know what happens if you send a tweet out, then your friends all retweet it, and it gets spread out around the world. And I just wanted to see, like if news items came out, or if somebody sent out a tweet, what would the trending be on Nashorn and that. So I said, well, I should be able to do this all in Nashorn. It shouldn't be shouldn't be very complicated. And the big thing here is this is where we get the big power in Nashorn over some of the other JavaScripts, is that we can use any of the existing Java libraries that are out there. And I said, oh, well, there is a Java library out there that for Twitter. It makes it really easy to use. Okay, so I got hold of Twitter for J library, and just wrote up this little application. And what it does, it goes off and does a query on Twitter on any reference to Nashorn or Nashorn JS. Okay, and these are all Java queries that we're making here, all Java-based queries we're making, and set the cutoff date, accumulate the data, and I won't get into the details of actually how we construct the graph, but it's all the code's here, and it's all straight JavaScript, nothing magic going on here. And if we run this, oops, run the library. And we just specify Twitter for J library as in my code path, or my class path. And if we run it, it takes a few seconds to go out onto the internet to get the data. And hopefully, within a second or two, we should get some results. And of course, it's not going to work, is it? Oh, there we go. So if you look at the long bar there, that was Friday when we announced Nashorn being included with B82. So obviously the tweets started to jump on Friday. So. Okay, back to slides. Okay, so the third thing that I mentioned that our group does is a project called Node.jar. And originally it started when we were trying to find some large applications that we wanted to test Nashorn with. And so we thought, well, obviously this is one of the biggest JavaScript projects that are out there, so let's try that. The thing about Node.js, though, is that most of it is native. There is some JavaScript code involved there, but a lot of it is actually written in native code. And how do you get native code to work on the JVM? Well, the thing is that most of the stuff that's implemented natively in V8 for Node.js already exists in Java. So the process that we're going through with Node.jar is to create the support for everything that's currently being done in Node.js and support it for Nashorn. We're in the process of trying to figure out how to open source Node.jar. The thing about Node.js is it's extremely powerful, and we're trying to figure out how to sort of get it to everybody's hands, but then also how Oracle wants to use it in its own business model. So we have to figure out how this all sort of fits in. So we're in this current process of trying to figure out how to open source it. The version that we have working internally is 8.15, and of course 10.1 just came out, and we're in the process of converting over to do that. So one of the reasons I was quite keen about coming down here to talk to you about Nashorn was that I think that there's opportunities for everybody as far as Nashorn is concerned, for both adding features to the language, making the language stronger, get better performance, finding better or more applications for it. And then in the development community, the Eclipse community, obviously it would be nice to be able to get the JavaScript plugins set up, make it more JavaScript aware, and adding debugging tools to be able to debug JavaScript, say from within Eclipse. One of the projects that I did 2 years ago, no, last year I guess it was adapt JDI over to work with Nashorn. So if you have a plugin now that works with JDI, you should be able to easily adapt it over to work with Nashorn, so that using the API, you can look at the fields of a Nashorn object the same as you would look at the fields of a Java object. And it's pretty straightforward. If you want to contact anybody on the team, you can monitor our blog at the Oracle blogs. The working group for the OpenJDK is Nashorn-dev, so you can send emails there, and we monitor those emails fairly closely, so you can find out what's going on there. You can contact me directly, James Laskey at oracle.com. My ID on Twitter is Wiccan, and we use the tag NashornJS. If you use hash Nashorn, you'll find all kinds of German references that are not related to programming at all, but people still do it and still use it. So I monitor both of them to figure out what's going on. So, and that's it. Thank you very much.